Firelight shakes across the walls of a one-room village house. A woman grips the straw mattress beneath her. Around her, other women move quickly, heating water, folding linen, crushing herbs, whispering prayers they have said before. Outside, the men wait in the dark. There is no hospital to send for, no antiseptic, no reliable surgery if the baby is stuck, no monitor to warn that the child is failing. There is only the midwife's hands, the mother's strength, and a room full of people hoping experience will be enough. And if the newborn comes out silent or weak, someone may baptize the child at once, not later, now. Because the question is not only whether the mother will survive, but whether the child will live long enough to be welcomed into both the village and the church. To understand how dangerous this moment really was, we first have to unlearn the modern image of childbirth as a medical event. What follows is not a hospital case file with a neat survival rate at the end. It is a reconstruction from medieval social history, church practice, medical writing, and the ordinary routines of village life. Who was allowed in the room, what people believed blood and pain meant, what a midwife could actually do, and what happened when she could not do enough. The common picture is simple. Medieval people were ignorant. Childbirth was chaos. Women either endured it or died, but that is too flat. A village had systems. Pregnant women were watched by neighbors and kin. Midwives carried practical knowledge learned from other births. The church supplied prayers, rituals, and urgent rules for baptism. Households stored linen, warmed water, prepared broths, and cleared space around the bed. None of this made childbirth safe. It made danger manageable until it was not. So the real question is not, was childbirth dangerous? Of course it was. The better question is how that danger moved through a woman's life, before labor, during birth, after delivery, and into the fragile first days of the child. The danger began long before the first contraction, because pregnancy itself changed a woman's place in the village. Pregnancy in a medieval village was not private in the way we might imagine. A woman's changing body was seen at the oven, in the field, at the well, and in church. Neighbors noticed when she moved more slowly, when she stopped carrying full pails, when she leaned against a wall after grinding grain. Her pregnancy belonged to her body, but it was also visible to everyone who depended on her labor, and that labor often continued. Ordinary women still baked, brewed, milked animals, weeded strips of land, gathered fuel, fed children, and hauled water. Not because people thought pregnancy was easy, but because a household could not simply pause. If the harvest was thin, if winter stores were low, if there were already small children at home, rest became a luxury. That mattered before labor ever began. Hard work drained strength. Poor food in lean months left less reserve. Repeated pregnancies gave the body little time to recover. A woman could arrive at childbirth already tired, underfed, and carrying the weight of a year's work in her bones. So pregnancy became communal by necessity. Female relatives and neighbors watched for signs. They offered advice about cravings, swelling, bleeding, and quickening, the first felt movements of the child. They prepared cloths, saved clean linen if they had it, set aside food, and remembered which women had difficult labors before. Religion was woven through this watching. A pregnant woman might pray to saints associated with childbirth, make vows, wear a charm, or trust in blessed objects. Church teaching shaped how people understood danger, sin, protection, and hope. This did not remove fear. It gave fear a language. And when labor finally started, the most important person in the room was not a physician, but a woman whose authority came from experience. When the pains became regular, the room changed hands. Men were usually pushed out. A husband might fetch water, heat the fire, run for help, or wait where he could hear too much and do too little. But the birth itself belonged to women. The midwife was often not a university-trained medical professional. In a village, she was more likely an older woman with a reputation. She had seen many labors. She knew which positions helped. She knew when a mother was tiring, when the baby was coming, and when the bleeding looked wrong. Around her stood the circle of women, a mother, a sister, a neighbor who had birthed 6 children, someone to hold the laboring woman upright, someone to wipe sweat from her face, someone to bring warm cloths, oil, ale, broth, or a basin. This was not just comfort, it was the working system of care. The midwife might have the mother squat, kneel, sit on a birthing stool, or brace herself against another woman. She encouraged pushing when the contractions came. She received the infant, cleared the mouth if needed, tied and cut the cord, and waited for the placenta. Afterward, she watched the mother's bleeding, because too much blood could turn relief into panic within minutes. She also carried spiritual responsibility. If a newborn looked too weak to survive, the midwife might perform an emergency baptism. That mattered deeply. In medieval Christianity, a child's life was not only measured by breath, but by whether it had been brought into the church before death. So the midwife stood at the crossing point of body and soul. Her knowledge could save lives. Experience mattered enormously. But she worked without germ theory, without antibiotics, without transfusions, and without safe surgery. When a birth went badly wrong, skill could reach its limit. But even with skilled hands around her, the birth room itself could become dangerous in ways no one could see. The most frightening danger could arrive after the baby was already crying. For a few hours, the room might feel saved. The cord was cut. The child had breathed. The mother had survived the worst of the pain. Then, later that day or the next, she began to shiver. A fever after childbirth was one of the great hidden killers of medieval life. The causes were everywhere, but invisible. Hands moved from the hearth, to cloth, to the mother's body. Water came from wells, barrels, or streams. Linen might be reused. A knife or blade for the cord might be wiped clean, but not made sterile. If the placenta did not come away fully, or if the birth tore the mother badly, damaged tissue could become a doorway for infection. Crowded houses made it worse. Animals nearby, smoke in the rafters, rushes or straw on the floor. People sleeping, cooking, bleeding, washing, and giving birth inside the same small world. Medieval people could recognize the pattern. A woman who had seemed safe became hot, weak, confused, and foul-smelling. Her belly might hurt. Her bleeding might change. She might sink quickly from fever into death. But they did not know bacteria existed, so they explained the danger through the medicine and religion they had. Perhaps her humors were out of balance. Perhaps foul air had entered the room. Perhaps corrupted fluids were trapped inside her. Perhaps God was testing the household. The treatments followed that logic. Keep her warm, give herbs, offer broth or ale, pray over her. Burn sweet-smelling things against bad air. Try to bring away retained matter. In some cases, bleed her, because illness was often understood as something that needed to be drawn out. Some care helped, rest helped, clean hands helped, when they happened. Removing a retained placenta could save a life if it was done in time. But without germ theory, prevention was uncertain. Without antibiotics, a deep infection could outrun every remedy in the village. Childbirth was not one danger. It was a chain of dangers: bleeding, fever, seizures, exhaustion, a baby stuck in the passage. And sometimes the crisis was not hidden at all. Sometimes everyone in the room could see that the labor had gone terribly wrong. A baby could become trapped inches from life. The labor had begun normally. The women had gathered. The mother had gripped a stool, a bedpost, another woman's hands. Hours passed, then more hours. The pains kept coming, but the child did not. This was obstructed labor, and it was one of the most terrifying emergencies a medieval birth room could face. The cause might be simple and deadly. The baby lay sideways. The head was badly angled. The mother's pelvis was too narrow, or she had labored so long that her strength was gone. Time now worked against both bodies. For the child, pressure could cut off breath and blood. A baby that had been alive at dawn might be dead by nightfall. For the mother, the same struggle could tear tissue, exhaust the womb, bring hemorrhage, or leave injuries that later turned into infection. The women in the room were not helpless. They changed her position. They urged her to stand, squat, kneel, or walk if she still could. They rubbed her belly. They gave warm drinks made with herbs. They called for another midwife, especially one known for difficult births. They also reached for the sacred. Prayers were spoken. Saints connected to childbirth were invoked. A belt, relic, charm, or holy object might be brought into the room and laid near the mother. These acts were not separate from care. To the people present, they were part of care. In a wealthy household, a physician or surgeon might be consulted. In a village, that was rare. Even when one arrived, there was no safe modern operation waiting behind the door. Caesarean section was not a normal rescue for a living mother in most medieval settings. It belonged mostly to the final edge of disaster, when a woman had died or was dying, and the child might still be removed in time to live, or at least to be baptized. So when labor went wrong, the room narrowed to movement, hands, prayer, and waiting. That is why the first minutes of a newborn's life could carry a spiritual urgency as intense as the labor itself. Then the child cried. For a moment, the whole room could change. The pressure, the fear, the hours of labor all narrowed into one sound from a wet, shivering newborn. But that cry did not mean the danger had passed. In a medieval village, a baby's survival was not assumed after birth. Many infants died in the first hours, days, or weeks of life. Some were born too early. Some were injured by a long labor. Some could not breathe well. Some grew cold before they could be wrapped and warmed. Others simply failed to feed. That could be fatal quickly. A newborn who could not suck strongly might weaken by the hour. A child born small, blue, silent, or limp forced the women in the room to act fast, because the body gave little time. So the first care was practical. Clear the mouth, rub the skin, warm the child, tie and cut the cord. Put the baby to the breast if the mother could manage it, or find another woman who could help. Then came the urgent spiritual question. In Latin Christian Europe, baptism brought the child into the church. It marked the baby as Christian. And if the infant seemed close to death, waiting for a priest could feel unthinkable. A midwife or another layperson might baptize the child at once with water and the proper words. This was not casual. It was emergency care for the soul. That is why joy and panic could exist in the same breath. A living baby had arrived, but every gasp was being watched. The room was counting color, warmth, sound, movement, and something more invisible, whether this child would live long enough to belong. But if the baby lived, the danger still did not end for the mother. Survival now meant recovery. Survival now meant lying still while the household kept moving around her. A medieval mother who had lived through childbirth could still be in danger for days, and sometimes weeks. Heavy bleeding could weaken her. Fever could follow infection. Exhaustion could make even sitting up feel impossible. Swollen or painful breasts could turn nursing into another crisis. And the baby still needed feeding. Breastfeeding was one of the strongest protections an infant had. It gave warmth, fluid, and food in a world where animal milk could be unsafe and dirty vessels could carry sickness. But it depended on the mother's body at the exact moment her body was most depleted. If she was underfed, ill, or pressured back into work too soon, feeding could falter. A woman might need to return to grinding grain, tending animals, fetching water, or helping in the fields before she had truly recovered. That pressure mattered. Less rest meant slower healing. Poor feeding meant a weaker child. So recovery was not private. Other women might bring food, sweep the floor, watch older children, or sit beside the bed and judge what was normal. They noticed bleeding. They felt for heat. They advised on sore breasts, milk, and the baby's latch. In a village, postpartum care was often a web of practical female attention. Then came a different kind of return. After childbirth, many Christian women went through churching or purification rituals before rejoining public worship. The meaning varied, but the structure mattered. A woman who had crossed a dangerous threshold was ritually welcomed back, not just alive, restored. Taken together, all of this suggests the real enemy was not simply childbirth itself, but the narrow margin between ordinary life and catastrophe. That narrow margin is the key. Medieval childbirth was not dangerous because villagers did nothing. They did a great deal. They called experienced women. They prepared cloth, water, warmth, food, prayers. They watched the mother, handled the newborn, and tried to read danger in a body they could not see inside. But their tools stopped at the edge of crisis. If a womb would not contract, there was no blood transfusion waiting. If fever rose after birth, there were no antibiotics. If the baby was stuck, there was no safe emergency surgery. If a newborn could not breathe, there was no modern neonatal unit to keep that tiny body alive through the first terrible hours. So the real villain was not ignorance. It was the lack of margin. The community could surround birth with hands, witnesses, rituals, and hope. What it could not do was guarantee time. So when that village waited outside the birth room, what were they really waiting to learn? They were waiting for three answers. Would the mother survive the bleeding, the exhaustion, the fever that might come days later? Would the child breathe? And would that child live long enough to be baptized, named, and counted among the living? That is how dangerous childbirth was in a medieval village. Not a single moment of danger, but a chain of narrow passages, obstructed labor, hemorrhage, infection, infant frailty, postpartum weakness, and the awful uncertainty after the room went quiet. But it was never only a private ordeal. Around that bed stood midwives, mothers, neighbors, godparents, prayers, warm cloth, and urgent hands. They could not control birth, so they surrounded it. If you want more village-level medieval history, subscribe. And tell me in the comments what surprised you most. The midwife's role, the urgency of baptism, the risk of infection, or the long recovery after birth. Thank you for watching.